to vote. And so we'll get with the past in just a minute when we come right back. So, like I mentioned when I accidentally started to go into the history of things, the history of voting rights goes all the way back to the beginning of American democracy. According to the people over at howstuffworks.com, quote, the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly include a right to vote, which is true. Only the House of Representatives were to be elected by the people, according to the Constitution. So that was where we, the people, could express their right to vote. However, these people were not all people, as you may be imagining. At first, only white, male property owners were able to vote. And that included some free black men later on when slavery was abolished. But even still, which we'll get into later, there were restrictions in place to discourage free black men from voting. Quote, all women, non-African American minorities, and many non-Christian religious groups were denied the franchise. So as you can see here, right from the beginning of the history of voting in America, immediately people were excluded and their votes were suppressed. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's kind of a unfortunate statement that we legislated voter suppression from the day that this company was started. So there's always been this underlying idea that only certain people should have a say in who is elected and how our government is formed. Now, that's changed significantly over years, but what we've seen is a evolution of the legal disenfranchisement of people. And I don't know, maybe I'm idealistic by thinking that over 200 years later, we might finally have it right, but it seems like we still aren't doing what we need to do in order to get people the ability to vote.
Yeah, so following the Civil War, there was the era of Reconstruction, which was basically the trying to put itself back together. You had a lot more free blacks in the South gaining sources of power for a little while until a lot of that was done away with the Dixiecrats in 1877. With the imposing of Jim Crow laws, which were designed to specifically restrict the black vote in the South and in other places. In addition to that, the 15th Amendment allowed voting regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Ideally, unfortunately, as we see with these Jim Crow laws, things like literacy test, poll taxes, and straight violence or intimidation were employed to discourage African Americans to vote. And those literacy tests, a lot of free blacks did not know how to read because they were never taught. And poll taxes, a lot of them were economically disenfranchised as well. So that also excluded them from the right to vote. According to, again, the people at How Things Work, quote, only 3% of voting age African American Southerners were registered to vote in 1940. So this is well after, almost 100 years after the Civil War ended. Excuse me. And still only 3% of voting age African American Southerners were registered to vote. Now, in 1965, jumping ahead in the timeline, we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which did do away with a lot of the Jim Crow laws and allowed women and minority votes to open up, which did help to make voting more equal and allow more of the people to expand and to expand that definition. However, this story doesn't end there. As anyone that studied history knows, racism and oppression did not just simply disappear with the civil rights movement of the 1960s. New voter suppression methods are still in use today. Common modern voter suppression techniques, there are voter registration problems. So if you can't register to vote, you can't vote at all. So not all states require registration. There's also confusion on where and when to register and confusion over what you need to register. So different documents and qualifications can change state to state, which if people don't have access to something like a birth certificate or a passport,